I believe that nationalism in Quebec is actually a form of conservatism. We're attracted to our traditions, our history, and we feel very strongly about preserving that.
Hi, and welcome back to the Saved Gen Z. Conservatives unfortunately did not do well in Quebec in the last election, and also managed to lose seats and some star MPs. So now there's this whole debate in the party about how we can do better in Quebec come the next election. Today, I will be joined by someone who actually managed to make the vote count in the riding go up, and that is Natasha Tremblay. She was the Conservative Party candidate in Avignon, Mitis, Matane, Matapédia. And we will be having a conversation on how the Conservative Party can be more appealing to Quebec voters in the next federal election. Before we get started with our discussion, please subscribe to the channel and consider hitting that notification bell. So, Natasha, thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
So how about we start off with you telling us a bit about who you are and what made you want to run as a Conservative Party candidate in Quebec?
Sure. So I first started getting interested in politics at probably about your age when I was in school. And when I turned 18, my very first vote was for Stephen Harper's Conservatives in 2015. And I knew that politics was my passion. So I moved to Ottawa, where I worked on Parliament Hill, and I ended up working for Peter Van Loan, who was the Member of Parliament for York Simcoe. Afterward, I moved to Quebec City, where I was studying, and I ended up running in Avignon, Mitis, Matane, Matapédia, which is in eastern Quebec, right on the New Brunswick border.
In my view, after following this great CAQ victory, the Conservatives kind of had an open net in Quebec to sway these voters to Conservatives, mostly because we had the dying bloc Québécois and the very unpopular Liberals. Unfortunately, they ended up missing an open net and they lost seats and they lost a few star MPs like Sylvie Boucher. So why do you think Conservatives did so poorly in 2019?
I think the problem was we had a great platform, one where we were, where our goal was very much to make sure Quebec had the room it needed to let the CAQ government go forward with what it wanted, what its projects were. And I think the issue was the Bloc Québécois kind of came back and basically had a very similar platform, respecting the Quebec government's wishes, but when it came down to the debates, well, François Blanchet is very charismatic for starters. He was TV personality before too. He's very charismatic and people liked him. And Andrew Scheer unfortunately didn't manage to connect as well to Quebec voters. A lot of Quebecers feel that the Conservative Party is a regional party in the West. Another thing too is that Quebec, I believe, is a conservative province, but doesn't really like to say it. The CAQ, you'll notice, doesn't really ever say they're conservative. They'll say they're nationalist, they'll say, but they won't say conservative. It's almost like it's got this connotation that kind of scares Quebecers. So that combined with the fact that our leader was from the West and stumbled on, for example, questions about abortion and things like that, it ended up making Quebecers feel, I understand that the conservative MPs and candidates want to respect Quebec's wishes, but I believe Blanchet more.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I watched the debates myself, and if I was a Quebec voter, I was more appeased by Blanchet because I think Andrew Scheer wasn't clear enough. He had the same kind of message for Quebec as he had for the rest of Canada. We're going to build pipelines. We're going to scrap the carbon tax. Well, the thing is, Quebec is the only Canadian province that supports the carbon tax and supports getting rid of pipelines. So as much as we should still do these things, when we're in Quebec, we should talk about things that Quebecers like. And I think he did not stand up for Bill 21 and laïcité. he didn't stand up for those strongly enough. When Trudeau was saying that he was going to go and put a court challenge on the secularism bill, Andrew Scheer should have said, Trudeau, this is none of your business. You should not be virtue signaling to people in Ontario. Instead, he just went along and like nodded his head. And yes, I do think he was not clear on some of these issues, these social issues, because they are very sensitive in Quebec. And if he had been clear from the start, I think it would have not been to so much trouble. So what when you were door knocking, when you were going to events and you're writing, what is the issue or the concern that you heard the most from Quebec voters?
Definitely after the TVA debate, it was abortion that they were all talking about. Before that, I'd say it was the environment.
Yeah.
At first it was very much like, we don't want pipelines going through this province, we don't want the federal government to impose that on us. We don't want it. We won't have it. And then after the TVA debate, I was just constantly being asked, do you want to make abortion illegal? Do you want to make abortion illegal? Of course not. And none of us said that, but that was the message that ended up coming across anyway. So, and I think we let it monopolize the debate too much. The abortion issue ended up being central, even though it was a non-issue. We weren't going to reopen the debate.
Yeah.
We made that very clear.
For sure. And I mean, Andrew Scheer was very, even though he himself was personally pro-life, he had nothing pro-life about his platform. He was not going to let MPs introduce legislation. He was not going to let them, his cabinet vote on the issues. It was very, very clear that he was not going to open the debate. But since he was, in my opinion, he wasn't a very strong candidate, he allowed these very cheap political games to take over and actually have an impact that it should have not had. And he had a pipeline as well. Look, build pipelines in the West, okay, because we don't want to divide Canada. The energy pipeline had a lot of repercussions, and if Quebecers don't want it, don't build it. But I do think at the same time that Quebecers have to realize that moving forward, we need to be energy independent. And in order to do that, we do need to have more pipelines to be able to have Canadian oil at Quebec gas stations instead of going and getting stuff from Saudi Arabia or Venezuela.
And a lot from the United States too. I mean, it's crazy too, because it's not just about getting oil to Quebec, it's about getting oil out east. And right now what they have to do is they ship it out from the West Coast, sail down, go through the Panama Canal, back up. It's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. It's ridiculous, and it creates carbon emissions. But big tanker boats are the largest transportation emitter of CO2. So I think that if they were clear on that, they weren't very clear. Andrew Scheer was not a clear person. If he was really clear, this is for the environment. We're doing this. We're going to protect your land, but we're going to be more eco-friendly. I think that could have played a bit better.
Yeah, and a good compromise. Quebecers trust their own provincial government. A good compromise could be like, we will negotiate and talk about it with the Quebec government. Make sure that we can go about this in a way that we can get an agreement on both, government levels. Even though pipelines are federal jurisdiction, it would just be a show of good faith and respect for the will of Quebecers.
Absolutely. So what do you think that the Conservatives can do differently next election to be more successful in Quebec?
Yeah, well, first, regardless whoever ends up leader, I think it is important that immediately they are very clear and transparent about social issues, because even though in the rest of the country it can make sense to have a more vague, ambiguous position on certain things, in Quebec, if you are vague about these issues, it almost seems like you might be hiding something, like you have a hidden agenda, like you claim you won't reopen the debate, but if you're personally pro-life, will you? So, it's important to be very clear from the beginning what your Quebecers don't want to be. They would feel like it was dishonest. So yeah, step one, be very, very clear about social issues. And then step two, well, we have to make it clear that I think they're going to do it on their own, but that the Bloc Québécois can't do as much as we can for the province. If we form government, we can have ministers from Quebec. We can actually make sure we protect Quebec. I don't agree with the argument saying the Bloc's always in opposition, they're useless. They're not useless, but they're always in opposition, so they always have to negotiate, which means they always have to compromise. Whereas if the Conservatives are in power, we can go ahead and protect Quebec's interests without having to worry about the liberals getting in the way.
Absolutely, that's a very good point you made. To be clear, and I mean that's why we're talking about the hidden agenda. That's why I like Leslie Lewis. She has no hidden agenda, and her policy is not controversial. It's a very, I think, common sense. And I'll ask you a bit more about that later. But yeah, I would say to also be more pro Quebec. Have a different, and that's what I like with what Erin O'Toole has released, and he has a kind of a Quebec separate Quebec platform. I think that's important to have a different message in Quebec before Quebec and remind the Quebecers the Bloc Québécois is not a nationalist party, it's a separatist party, right? François Blanchet just campaigned in a smart way. He decided to campaign on protecting Quebec values, but in reality, when they go to Parliament, they remove all the Canadian flags from their offices and they want to get Quebec out of Canada. So that was, I think, something that a lot of people kind of didn't catch on. So to talk about hidden agendas, so Lislyn Lewis wants to ban sex selective abortion. It's the only thing she wants to ban that, and the idea of forcing women, because there are some abusive relationship where the husband will force a woman into getting a procedure that she doesn't want to get. And this is something that was polled in Quebec, and 82% of Quebecers think that these two things should not be allowed. So do you think it would be a good idea for the Conservatives to bring these two specific proposals?
I think it would be risky. It's not
Mm-hmm.
so much that the ideas are bad in themselves. It's like if
Mm-hmm.
you said, a lot of people would probably, if you ask them, intuitively respond, well, no, that's not okay. I think it would be something, though, first of all, to be very transparent and clear about.
Yeah.
Make sure that the limits of this are very clearly defined. If let's say we had a leader like Leslie Lewis, make sure that there is no ambiguity about what we're
Yeah.
doing. And I also think that Quebecers, no matter how carefully you approach the issue, there's always a bit of a reaction that with issues like abortion, it's that they think it comes from religion. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
and so Quebecers have a bit of an unusual relationship with religion interfering with the state, because
Yes.
for many historical reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And and so if like such a bill could give the impression it's religiously motivated or it's religion interfering with politics, then it would definitely be rejected by Quebecers. But
Yeah.
it would really depend, but there's risks there on that
Oh,
level. So
absolutely. I see it. The whole religion thing. I mean, that's why this is a big misconception that non-Quebecers have of Bill 21. They think that Quebec is a racist, intolerant province that is wanting to only have, secular people. That's not the case. The reason why Bill 21 was put in power is because we had the Catholic Church that was in charge of Quebec, and they were dogmatic and they abused their power. And I have, my grandmothers, and I had that, had her friends. They had like 8, 9 babies because they were told you're going to go to hell if you don't have babies. Like there's such a deep brokenness that has happened in Quebec that I think that if you're not Quebecer, you just can't understand.
mhm.
So from that, I think that's why people are sensible. Um,
Yeah, and there's historical reasons even as to why the Catholic Church had such an oppressive role, and it is the direct result of when the British conquered the French here. We became, well, British subjects. We were colonized,
yeah,
and the reason their empire was so successful is because they would use indirect rule in their colonies.
yeah,
So instead of just directly ruling over their conquered nations, what they would do is they would make a deal with local authority that you can keep your control over the people here as long as you accept British rule.
yeah.
And so the local authority in Quebec was the Catholic Church. So the church was kind of used against us to force us into like to accept our oppression. And
Yeah.
it got to the point where in the 50s, the French people were all working in the factories and farms, and they were not educated, and they were not, and it was the English who had all the wealth in the province. And in the 60s, the Quiet Revolution came along, where they finally got rid of these structures, and that had to start with getting rid of the church.
Hmm.
So that's why religion is seen as oppression in Quebec.
For sure. And I think it's unfortunate that that had to happen because I'm a religious person. I'm not a Catholic, I'm a Protestant, but I think it's unfortunate because what happened was so wrong and it was so against what the Bible says, and it's really unfortunate that all these Quebecers are now kind of like have such a bad view of religion because they were oppressed by it, and that's just history. And I hope that in the future people can start to see that religion, when it's not invasive and when it's more of a personal thing, is actually very beautiful. In your view, what leadership candidate, which one is your do you think that will be the best fit to win more votes for the Conservatives in the next election?
So to me, I support Peter Mackay. I am involved in his campaign. I'm his Quebec youth coach, and the reason I backed Peter Mackay, and it was the minute we knew we would be in a leadership race, I was hoping Peter Mackay would run so I could support him, and because he is the co-founder of this party. He was a senior minister under Stephen Harper for 9 years. He played. He was behind many great advances that the Harper government brought. For instance, having a victims' bill of rights in Canada, I think, is so important. I mean, it's interesting. Victims of criminal acts. Now, more and more, we are thinking about what happens to victims. Like, let's say the Me Too movement. All of a sudden, we're paying attention to victims and how they live as victims of crime. But conservatives are actually ahead of that by championing victims' rights. So I think that, and that was Peter Mackay. I think that kind of visionary leadership is what we need, because conservatism can't be just about lowering taxes. We need to have a vision of the future that can reach, that can connect, that all Canadians can connect to. Peter Mackay is from the Maritimes. He's originally from Nova Scotia, but he's also very much a supporter of, for example, Alberta and oil and gas. He is unequivocal about no carbon tax and supporting Canadian oil and gas. But he also understands the East. He's from there. So I think that he's someone who can unite us. As for Quebec, well, like I was saying, you have to be very clear about your views on social issues. He is very coherent and clear and transparent. He is pro-choice and he is for gay marriage, and he makes that very clear. There is no ambiguity in his positions, and I think that's really important in Quebec.
For sure. You made some good points. However, Quebecers don't like political correctness. If you watch Le Bye Bye at the end of the year, they make fun of PC culture all night. Right? They're not a fan of political correctness. They believe in free speech. They believe in autonomy. Peter Mackay is politically correct. He's supported politically correct legislation, and he's always apologizing. There's people in his that have supported him that are calling for the Conservative Party to condemn Quebec values in Bill 21. And also his French isn't very good.
Well, first of all, on the language, having spoken many times with Peter Mackay, I personally believe his French is very good and it can get better, and he's working very hard on that. As for his platform, I find Aaron O'Toole, it's a bit hit and miss, because on one hand, he does understand that Quebec is distinct and has a distinct culture, and his platform's a lot about that. But at the same time, he clearly isn't fully understanding Quebec if he allows himself to be ambiguous on social issues. And that's as much for social conservatives as progressives. In Quebec, they won't like that kind of ambiguity. Like, for example, when he is asked about his views on abortion, if he's asked by, people in his campaign tell me, he's pro-choice. You don't need to ask that question. But then at the same time, he's very, he right now very much supports him. And so it's all very unclear. Or just recently, Radio-Canada article came out where he was in a meeting with Quebec social conservatives and saying things like how he wasn't sure about the bill on conversion therapy and all these things. So, but then he'll tweet in French how much he supports LGBT. So it's very vague.
Yes, I see what you mean.
Quebecers will hate that. I know.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, on abortion, I think Aaron O'Toole is actually pro-choice. He has a red light from the Campaign for Life Coalition. What makes him separate from Peter Mackay is that he's respects. I don't feel like, as a social conservative, I don't feel like Peter Mackay respects me because he calls our causes thinking albatross. He says that, it's reprehensible to raise your kids with Christian values. That thing makes me worrisome because we've seen what where that type of, red Tory leadership, we've seen what it did to the UK with Theresa May and to Germany with Angela Merkel. And it's not good because what happens is you'll make the extreme right, the far right rise, and you'll make the movement kind of weak. So that's what I'm concerned with particularly. But I do agree that O'Toole is kind of a joke sometimes when he says, I'm, he says he's a social conservative. Last election, he ran on being more like Peter Mackay. He was a red Tory and he was running to make the party more progressive. And now he's trying to make the party more conservative. And he says he's true blue. He's not a true blue conservative. He's not a social conservative. And we all see that. I don't know any social conservative that plans on voting for him. So I think that's something we can agree on despite disagreeing on social issues.
Yeah, exactly. There's just some ambiguity. And I think that in Quebec, well, they don't really like that kind of thing. And I think social conservatives too, because they feel very strongly about social issues. So then to have someone who's just like, the issue is I feel like he's pandering to everybody. I feel like he's calculated, if we get Quebec and we get social conservatives on the second ballot, we could end up winning this thing in the second tour. And so it's like, until there's like this calculation that was made and his platform is based around that, which I find is just not the most honest way to go about it. I like someone who is clear on their principles and who will take risks even if it's not a popular opinion or it's a little controversial. They are still willing to go ahead and defend that, no matter what it could cost them in a leadership race, for example. We need leaders who believe in something, not just believe in becoming the leader.
But Peter Mackay backed down multiple times when we talk about not backing down and being strong. I don't know how many times he's apologized at this campaign, but it was quite a lot. One of the more recent one was with the blockades. He said, these things come down. When he was praising the people who peacefully took down a blockade, and then he had to go back. He had to go back on the yoga tweet. He went back on the email about diversity. That's not good. For me, I want a conservative who's bold. I don't want someone who's just like going to pander to the left and always back down.
Yeah, I think the reason he wasn't, he just like questioned some of the things he said is maybe they were kind of impulsive comments at the time that he thought, okay, that wasn't very nuanced and also those are rather little remarks on kind of, I think that they were too trivial, those things he like, talking about some group that may have taken down a blockade. It's so trivial. We're talking about Trudeau and yoga. It's like, you don't want to look like you're just focusing on petty little attacks. You want to focus on the big picture when you're running for leader. So I think that's why there was some regret about some of those comments, because I've personally seen him defend, very firmly some conservative principles. For example, when we had a town hall for Quebec people, for Quebec youth. And at the end, somebody asked him, we have to fight climate change. There are two ways of doing that, a carbon tax or regulation. What do you support? And then he said, well, neither. I don't support a carbon tax, and I don't think that we should add more red tape. I think that we need to support Alberta oil, and and then he just completely defended the oil sands in a town hall with a bunch of Quebecers who, a lot of them might not have liked that answer, but he's still willing to go ahead and defend those conservative principles despite who his audience was. And so to me, and then he had all the arguments to actually, the guy told me after the town hall, I don't agree with what he said, but he was very clear about what he said, and I respect that. And I think that's what we need. We can't have someone who changes their platform based on who they're talking to.
That's true. I wonder what answer Aaron would have given to that guy. Probably would have said, "Oh, we need a carbon tax." I mean, the guy who runs his campaign is Walid Solomon. He ran Patrick Brown's PC campaign, and they had a carbon tax. So, I mean, who knows? Before we end this discussion, I want to know: are you planning on running again as a candidate in the next election?
Never say never. I don't have any active plans at the moment to do it, but should an opportunity come up and I'm in a place in my life where I want to do that, why not?
Yeah, why not? I mean, it's definitely a good experience, a good growing experience. Um, so, Natasha, I want to thank you for coming on today. We had a very productive conversation, and ended up agreeing on more things than disagreeing, and that's a good thing.
That's what the big blue tent's all about, right?
Exactly, exactly. I hope that you enjoyed our discussion. If you haven't subscribed already, I highly encourage you to do so because I got a lot of great content coming this summer. Thank you, and God bless you.